This episode of the Duke Basketball Report podcast is brought to you by Bird Campbell, PA. Bird Campbell means business. Hello, Duke fans, and welcome to episode 96 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. Right now, it's Saturday, December 2nd, 2017. By the time this show ends, I think it'll be Sunday, December 3rd. We're doing a little bit of a modified schedule this weekend for the DBR podcast because the three of us can't all be on the call at the same time. So I'll introduce us, and then as we go forward, I'll kind of explain the way that the format of today's show is going to go. So I am your host this week. I am Sam Klein, coming to you as usual from Denver, Colorado. I have one of my co-hosts with me right now. That's Jason Evans. He's in Atlanta. Jason, do you want to explain to the folks why we're kind of breaking up the show this week?
Yes, it is my fault. I will freely say it is all my fault. It is my wife's 50th birthday. She's turning 50, and we are going to a spa where she's going to be pampered for a couple days and where I am going to focus upon her. Because it's her 50th birthday and she deserves that. She's a wonderful, lovely woman. And so the notion that I would, in the middle of us visiting this spa, the notion that I would spend an hour or two chatting about basketball with my good buddies for her birthday just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So I'm the one to blame. I'm the one who's unavailable when we would ordinarily record on Sunday. In fact, I couldn't even be available on Monday most of the day until very, very late Monday. So Sam and I are going to do part of the podcast right here, right now. And then I'm going to go celebrate my wife's birthday. And you guys are going to do the rest of it. You and Donald can do the rest. Does that sound good? Does that work?
It works for me. So happy birthday to your wife. Very nice. Nice of you to do that.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
So what we're going to do now, like I said, it's Saturday. The South Dakota game hasn't happened yet. We're recording Saturday morning. So Jason and I are going to talk a little bit about the Indiana game that happened this week. And then we'll take a quick break. We'll come back.
Hey, I got an idea. How about I react to the South Dakota game that hasn't happened yet? Gosh, Duke came out kind of slowly in this game, but then they really turned it on when it got a little bit nervous and they won going away. Did I just do the South Dakota? I think I just did the South Dakota game because that's every Duke game.
We will update when we get there. But so then we'll take the break. We'll come back, and Donald and I will talk a little bit more about Indiana. We'll talk a little bit about South Dakota, and we'll kind of look at the schedule going forward. So with that in mind, it being Saturday morning and the South Dakota late game pull away hasn't happened yet, Jason, why don't you give us your general thoughts? So Duke beat Indiana on Wednesday night. They played at Assembly Hall. This was Duke's first true road game of the season. They're the only one they're going to play in the non-conference, as long as you don't consider St. John's to be an actual true road game. They won 91-81. They won, as Jason said, they won going away. They were winning at halftime. IU managed to pull back, take the lead with a few minutes left in the game, but Duke ultimately prevailed. So Jason, why don't you just give us your general thoughts on the game from Wednesday night?
So, I mean, it's clear at this point. First of all, let me back up and say this. My prediction for the game, remember, I sort of led the preview, and I talked about the fact that I didn't think Indiana could keep up with Duke. I didn't think that this was a very good Indiana team, and I especially thought that they would have trouble with us on the inside. And I was wrong about a lot of that. They did keep up with us. They were, not only were they in the game, they had a lead on us late. And it would not have been shocking. It would not have been a huge surprise if Duke had suffered their first loss in this game. I guess that I had underrated two factors. One was how much the home crowd, how much Indiana would get up at home. And God, their crowd was fabulous. The crowd really drove them. Indiana played far and away their best game of the season. There's been a good bit of stuff written and said in the wake of that game about where has this Indiana team been. They executed really well, really smartly on offense, took good shots. They played with tremendous intensity and rebounded really well. They did a lot of things that Indiana hasn't been doing that well during the season. And as a result, they stayed very close to Duke. And then the other factor, in addition to Indiana being at home and playing really well, was Duke's exhausted. I mean, there's no question about that. The Blue Devils have traveled 8,500 miles over the past couple weeks. It's a really remarkable statistic. They got them with the tournament out in Portland, on the other side of the country in Portland. They flew back. They went to classes on Monday and part of Tuesday, and then they hopped on a plane Tuesday evening to go to Indiana to play the game on Wednesday. It was their 9th game in 20 days. It was our 5th game in 9 days. And these guys haven't slept in their bed, but maybe 1 or 2 nights in the past week. And they are 18-year-old freshmen. They have their very first exams coming up next week. You know, they've got to be, you know, they're in the home stretch on their first semester classes. I mean, I can forgive them for not being on top of their game lately.
Jason, you're now making excuses for a team that won by 10 on the road in an environment that could have been described as Maryland-esque circa, 2005.
Yeah, but what we've continually seen with this Duke team is a trend that is absolutely troubling, which is that they don't play inspired basketball for the first 30 minutes of the game. And yes, they have been truly excellent in the final 5 to 10 minutes of games. And it has won them games that look like they were absolute losses. I mean, we talked last time in the podcast that the Texas and the Florida games, according to all these computer modeling kind of things, Duke had like less than a 1 or 2% chance of winning either one of those games.
Do you think that that tendency that they've now shown in almost all of their major games is something you can attribute to like the makeup of the team? Perhaps there's something about the fact that they're all freshmen that has to do with that, or the fact that they're not familiar with each other. Do you think that plays a role, or do you think that they really just don't get inspired early and that it's just something the coaches are going to have to hound them about?
I mean, I think it comes down to defense. To me, the difference is on defense. Did you happen to see Ben Swain, who is a notable commentator and follower of the Duke basketball team? He does some stuff on the web. He had an amazing tweet about Duke's most recent games. Did you see what he wrote about Duke's defense in the final 10 minutes of the games?
No, good. I think I did, but why don't you recap it again?
This is fabulous. So Ben Swain looked at the final 10 minutes plus overtime of the Michigan State, Portland State, Texas, Florida, and Indiana games. Five most recent games, all 5 games incredibly tight, or Duke was down like in big ways with 10 minutes to go. And then Duke stormed back and won all these games going away. Michigan State, Portland State, Texas, Florida, and Indiana. He was looking at points per possession, which is a really key defensive stat because it's better than like field goal percentage or other things like that, because it really measures your efficiency, whether someone is, how many points are they scoring each time they get the ball. In the first 30 minutes of games, and I hate giving too much stats on the podcast, by the way, because I think people have trouble grabbing numbers. So folks, listen to me carefully. I'm going to talk slowly. The first 30 minutes of those 5 games, Duke's opponents averaged 1.21 points per possession. Every time they had the ball, they scored 1.21 points. In the last 10 minutes of those games, Duke's opponents scored 0.72 points per possession. So, put another way, Duke allowed a total of 73 points in the last 55 minutes of those games. 73 points in 55 minutes. To put that in perspective, over a full 40-minute game, that would be Duke giving up 53 points per game.
And the way that this offense scores, that would be sufficient.
53 points, like Virginia, which plays at an incredibly slow pace and is known for an incredible defensive efficiency, the best defensive team in the country pretty consistently over the past few years and again this year. Virginia they would kill for an efficiency where they only give up 53 points per game. The final 10 minutes of games, Duke is allowing an average of 53 points per game. That is an unreal number. This team's defensive efficiency is in the final 10 minutes of games is the kind of stuff that is terrifying for college basketball because, by the way, their offensive efficiency is through the roof. What these guys they get into, pick and roll or one on two-man game with Grayson Allen and Marvin Bagley, or with Bagley throwing high post, low post to Wendell. Wendell Carter. But really, there's some other stuff I've read. The Grayson Allen, Marvin Bagley two-man game is pretty much unstoppable at the NCAA level. There are all these advanced statistical guys who've run models on it and stuff. And when Duke gets Grayson and when Duke gets Grayson and Marvin Bagley into a two-man game together, whether it's high pick and roll or Bagley posting, Duke is scoring at it's like the highest two-man rate in the country. I don't know why. Back to your question, I don't know why we're not playing good defense for the first 30 minutes of games. And we're not playing good defense, and we're not rebounding either, by the way.
Do you think that this has kind of been my thought the last couple of weeks, is that Duke hasn't really found its defensive identity yet. So they're athletic enough to kind of just turn up the intensity when things get, down to the wire, but they don't have a game plan that they really trust, because it seems like, they're switching the defense around. I felt like against Indiana, they didn't play maybe enough zone relative to what they had been doing in previous games. And IU was able to get the ball inside and really beat us one-on-one a lot, especially for the beginning of that game. Do you think that it's just that they haven't really locked down what defensive game plan they want to execute yet?
I think that's part of it. I think Coach K, look, the honest to God truth is he hasn't had time to fix the defensive problems. He hasn't had time. That they don't know what defense they want to play.
Yeah, no, and that's kind of my way of asking, do you think that this is a fixable scheme problem, or do you think that this is an effort problem?
Oh, it's way too early for me to say that it's not fixable. And it can't not be fixable because they're clearly doing it right in the final 10 minutes of games, and getting them to figure out what they're doing right in the final 10 minutes and expand that over 20, 30, 40 minutes. That's sort of an easy step. If you're able to do something correctly part of the time, getting you to do it correctly more of the time is really easy versus a team that can't do something correctly at all. The simple reality is we've had an incredibly busy early season schedule. We are an incredibly young team, and I think Coach K and the rest of the coaching staff haven't had time to really to dissect it, to get these guys where they need to be on defense. And in the next 31 days, we have 5 games. 5 games in 31 days. We played 9 games in like 15 days or something like that. So we are absolutely going to have a ton more time to work on things. And if you're the rest of college basketball, that's a scary prospect. That's really scary.
And the things that Duke hasn't done well, like you said, are very fixable. And I think the one glaring weakness so far is the outside shooting, where Duke basically, other than Allen, nobody can reliably hit the 3-pointer. And we know from previous seasons, like talking about Luke Kennard's freshman season, where he never really got going on offense, but then his sophomore year, it's like it really clicked. There's no reason that can't happen for Gary Trent or Trayvon Duval, while Duke has a lot more downtime over the next month to kind of reset themselves and be ready for ACC season.
The one thing I'll say about the outside shooting, and you hit upon the next thing I was going to bring up. You said, "Oh, there's lots of time. That we can fix that." Outside shooting is one of those things that sometimes you can't fix. There are some people who just aren't good outside shooters, and We knew that outside shooting was going to be a concern for this Duke team coming into the season. We knew that they would be way better in the post than Duke usually is, and that they had a lot fewer guys who are really comfortable taking lots of three-pointers. And I don't know that we will ever be at the point where we say that this Duke team is a good outside shooting team like past Duke teams have been.
Gary Trent came in with some kind of notoriety for shooting, didn't he?
He did. He wasn't. I mean, he was known as a guy who was a good 3-point shooter. He wasn't known as a great 3-point shooter.
He wasn't good Andre Dawkins, right?
Exactly. He wasn't Andre Dawkins. He wasn't Luke Kennard. He wasn't JJ Redick. He wasn't even John Shire, for that matter. Gary Trent's game, to some extent, people thought was more of a mid-range game, and he's shown a lot of that. He's hitting less than 30% of his three-pointers in the season now. He's at 29.4%, and teams are going to pack it in against us more and more and more. I mean, if you think about it, even if we were shooting fairly well from outside, I'd probably pack it in against Duke because we're so efficient and so good on the inside. I would say even if Duke had better outside shooters, I'd be like, you got to beat me from the outside, because I know I've seen enough of Duke's inside game to know that they'll kill me from the inside. As a team, we're now hitting 322 from three on the season, 32%. And we were wretched. We were 3 of 17 against Indiana, and a lot of them were wide open. I mean, there were a couple. Grayson Allen still takes some contested threes, but for the most part, we're shooting nothing but wide open threes, and we're hitting only 32% of them.
Yeah, Trent went 0 for 6 the other night from 3, and Duval went 1 for 3, and it's weird because Duke so far seems to be they're very talented. They're able to beat a lot of these good teams. They won this road game in a tough environment, and they're doing it almost entirely without 3-point shooting, which, given the makeup of our program the last however many years, seems almost ridiculous, because every year it's like, well, Duke's going to light it up from 3, but if they go cold from 3, then they're going to lose. And that's been the story probably as long as I've been watching Duke basketball, and there's none of that now. I mean, Duke just throws the ball in the post, and Bagley and Carter, and then Grayson Allen running the pick and roll basically is the entire offense. I mean, Duval gets in the lane and makes good passes, but for the most part, it's coming from the big men, and it's just so weird to watch a Duke team that works like that.
I agree. I'm going to advocate for something. Oh boy. I sort of think we're getting to the point where we need to think about giving Alex O'Connell more minutes. Alex O'Connell's hitting 54% from 3 this season. Now it's
but how many has he taken?
11. It's 11. It's a small sample size, but he looks a lot better out there shooting from long distance than Gary Trent and Trevon Duval do. And I mean, O'Connell's he's getting more minutes than I think any of us thought he was going to. But I want to see him. I'd love to see him get even a little bit more, because I feel like we've got to get a little more outside in balance. I mean, teams are not going to give Wendell Carter Jr. and Marvin Bagley room to operate in the post unless we force them to give us room. They're just not. Carter and Bagley are too good inside, and teams are already daring Trevon Duval to shoot from the outside. I mean, they give him he doesn't take a three-pointer that he has a guy within 7-8 feet of him. And they're going to start doing that with Gary Trent Jr. as well, I think, because Trent's struggling so much from out there. And O'Connell has shown me, look, in warm-ups, there were a couple times in the Indiana game, you're going to laugh at this, where like the whistle blew when O'Connell was in the game, and the shot didn't count, and O'Connell just turned and sort of launched one from distance. It didn't count. No one was guarding him or anything like that, but it was all net. He did it twice. It was all net both times. And I feel like maybe that's a sign.
This is the part where maybe you're diving too deep into what you want to see. We know that you're a big Alex O'Connell fan coming into the season, since he's one of your Atlanta boys. I mean, maybe that's the answer. I don't think we've seen enough of him in enough competitive situations that we know that he's going to be a 40% 3-point shooter, and that over an extended period over a proper sample that he's definitely going to be an all-around better player than Gary Trent is, even if Trent isn't making that many threes.
So wait, I want to be clear. I'm not saying he's going to be a better all-around player than Gary Trent. I don't think that, this season at least. I am merely saying I think we are reaching the point where we need to find a way to give him a little more time, probably at Trent's expense and a little bit at Duval's expense, because I think Allen has done a great job running the point when he has to. Because I think we need more outside shooting on the floor occasionally. Not all the time, but at least occasionally.
All right. And did you do I have all of your thoughts at least on the Indiana game? Because I think I'll talk a little bit more with Donald about it when we come back from the break. Is that enough from you on Indiana? Did you want to talk? Did you want to talk about the ACC Big Ten Challenge in general?
I do, but the last thing I wanted to say about the Indiana game was I wanted to single out Wendell Carter Jr., who I thought had an incredible game when he ran into some foul troubles, but he was unbelievably efficient. I thought it was his best game of the year. He had 12 rebounds, 5 of them offensive. He had almost half of our offensive rebounds as a team. And as good as Marvin Bagley has been, if I was picking a player of the game, it was Wendell Carter Jr., who I think scared Indiana on the inside. Every time he was in the game, I think they were as worried about him as they were about Bagley, which is amazing considering how good Bagley is. But when you consider that Wendell Carter played 24 minutes, he had 18 points and 12 rebounds and 2 blocked shots, by the way. Man, that is a big game in 24 minutes.
And generally a tougher defensive assignment than Bagley had, because he had Indiana's big guy. Was it Davis? Yeah,
Deron Davis. Davis, who had his best game of the year. And I thought, Bagley battled him inside. Carter battled him inside really, as effectively as he could. And by the way, speaking of that, I wanted to take a real quick moment and shout out to Marquise Bolden. Grayson Allen, after the game, Grayson Allen posted a post-game tweet, which he very rarely does. Grayson doesn't usually comment on games that much on his Twitter feed. But his post-game tweet was a picture of Marquise Bolden on the floor grabbing a loose ball. And Grayson took that moment to praise Marquise Bolden for what was a great hustle play. And Grayson said, games are won with hustle plays. Shout out to Marquise for coming up with a big one last night. And it's that play. It was in the final minute or minute and a half, 2 minutes of the game, where Marquise went to the floor, grabbed a loose ball, and changed a possession from Indiana to Duke. It was a big play in the game. And I thought Bolden had a couple other plays where he had some really nice defense that he played down the stretch. He's a guy who, to some extent has been forgotten or not buried, but he just doesn't get much attention because Carter and Bagley are so good. And look, Bolden is battling DeLaurier for postman backup minutes. But I thought, Bolden played really, really nicely in his limited time on defense. And that's going to be an important factor for Duke, really important.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you brought up Bolden, because I know that I'm going to mention him again, Donald. Hey, why don't you give us your thoughts on the ACC Big Ten Challenge, and then we'll wrap with you, and I'll switch over to the future part of the show.
Awesome, excellent. So my thoughts on the ACC Big Ten Challenge, aside from the fact that the ACC kicked butt, absolutely dominated the Big Ten in a way. I think everyone thought the ACC would be favored in the challenge. It was 14 games. We won 11-3. You might have found someone who was going to say, oh, maybe the ACC will win 9-5. But for us to win 11-3 was a big. It's the most wins in the history of the challenge. But the reason this is significant is this: most years you can pencil in the Big Ten for about 8 NCAA tournament bids, 7, 8, 9, somewhere in that kind of vicinity. Well, after getting crushed in the challenge, the only Big Ten teams who look like they are, locks to make the NCAA tournament are Michigan State, Minnesota, and Purdue. They're the only teams that have any decent non-conference victories. The rest of the conference, Maryland got a win over Butler. Michigan beat Virginia Commonwealth, but Michigan doesn't have. I mean, Virginia Commonwealth, is that what you're going to hang your hat on? Butler, is that the only thing you're going to hang your hat on? They're the Big Ten, outside of Michigan State, Minnesota, and Purdue. The Big Ten doesn't have a single team that's beaten a team that's in the top 50 in Ken Pom. They only have 4 wins against top 100 Ken Pomeroy teams. So now that
that is striking.
That's unreal. Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, the teams at the bottom of the ACC, teams like Georgia Tech, even Wake Forest and Pittsburgh, Boston College, these teams have collected wins against top 100 teams, and the Big Ten just hasn't. So after the ACC beat the Big Ten 11-3, with and by the way, the Big Ten's non-conference season is almost done. The Big Ten's playing more conference games this year than usual, so they're starting conference games like in the next week or two. I think I saw Northwestern has like 2 or 3 conference games in the month of December.
Yeah, because they're playing their conference tournament a week early.
That's right.
So they can play in Madison Square Garden. It's very weird.
They're playing their conference tournament early, exactly. So the Big Ten, which, like I said, usually gets 7, 8, 9 bids, they could easily be looking at a season where they only get 4 or 5 NCAA tournament bids. And if that happens, that could free up an extra bid or 2 for the lower tier ACC teams. We talked, we gave predictions at the beginning of the season, how many ACC teams were going to make it. I don't remember. I think I said 9. And I am liking that number right now because the ACC, compared to other conferences, is standing out in a pretty big way. Not just the top. I mean, the top of the ACC is really standing out, but even the middle of the ACC and even the lower tier of the ACC is standing out as really competitive. And it absolutely looks like the Big Ten could struggle to get bids, and that could be good for the ACC. So that's my comment on the ACC Big Ten Challenge.
Yeah, it is interesting that every year we when the committee gets together to do the selection process, they don't specifically say, Big Ten gets this number of teams based on how good we perceive them to be, but it kind of shakes out that way because the better each conference does in the non-conference, the stronger the teams are going into conference play. Therefore, the more opportunities for the lower parts of the major conferences to get wins against high caliber teams. The ACC is going to have a lot more. The lower tier ACC teams will have more opportunities to do that. The Big Ten teams won't. And like you said, their non-conference season is almost over. I know that a lot of the teams are going to get conference games and then go back and play a couple more non-conference games, but their sort of the marquee games are all over. And the opportunities for those mid-level Big Ten teams to prove that they belong in the tournament discussion now, not necessarily in March, but now has really diminished. And now they don't have those kinds of opportunities to do so. So this part of the season, even though it's so far away from March, has so much to do with where the selection committee goes, especially for those mid-level teams. It's not necessarily an issue for the Dukes and North Carolinas and Michigan States, but it is going to have an effect on, like you said, teams like Maryland in the ACC. Teams like Georgia Tech, although Georgia Tech seems to be struggling now. Teams like Georgia Tech and Miami and Florida State, those teams are going to have more opportunities now to prove themselves than those Big Ten teams will. And yeah, I think your assessment on that is right on. I don't necessarily get
the ACC teams that I think are going to benefit from this kind of stuff. Miami's going to make the tournament for sure. Miami's maybe even a top 15 team. But Virginia Tech, Florida State, Clemson, Syracuse. Those are the kind of teams that I think that could have been on the bubble. Maybe Georgia Tech and NC State. Georgia Tech and NC State are in the running.
What do you mean? NC State beat Arizona, right?
Yeah,
right. Yeah, Arizona was totally crashing.
Yeah, a very impressive. It's still an impressive win, even with Arizona crashing like that. It's still a very impressive win. But those teams in the lower half of the ACC If we're looking at 9 bids or so, you were going to look back on this part of the season and how well the ACC has done, and that's going to be why you're going to see teams that maybe don't have a winning record in the ACC who are still in the conversation because the conference is so strong.
I think that's all we're going to get this week out of Jason. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll hear from our sponsor, and we'll come back, and I'll be talking to Donald Wine sometime after I'm talking to Jason about Duke's recent games back in the cupcake part of the schedule. No offense to the South Dakotas of the world, and we'll go from there. So Jason, thank you for making what time you could have today. Happy birthday to your wife, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Yep. Thanks a lot. Sam, I appreciate you making time for me.
Okay. I'm going to go get breakfast. This episode of the Duke Basketball Report podcast is brought to you by the fine fellows over at Bird Campbell, PA. We have a message from Tucker Bird this week who said he wanted to give his takeaway from the Indiana game. So he says, "You got to love the way that Grayson carries himself with all the dignity and aplomb of the former Duke greats who were subjected to the same jeering from opposing fans. He didn't wilt, he fed off of it. Even his crouching tiger pose after nailing that late three-pointer dagger at the top of the key over an outstretched defender had an elegance to it." So thanks again to the gentleman at Bird Campbell, PA for sponsoring the show. Okay, we are now fast forwarding into the future. It is now Monday night. I think originally when Jason and I recorded on Saturday, we said we were going to do this Sunday. Some stuff came up. So here we are Monday night. Duke did manage to beat South Dakota on Saturday. And I am now joined by a different co-host. So still Sam here, but on the other line, I have Donald Wine, who is joining us, I think as usual, from Washington. Is that right, Donald?
Yes, I am in my usual spot, and the real MVP of this podcast is you, Sam, for being able to accommodate both Jason and I with this. So thank you for doing that, and thank you guys out there for listening.
Anything for you guys, and more importantly for our listeners. So,
and really for Mrs. Evans, because this is her day. I believe it's her birthday today.
And really for Jason's wife, it sounds like they had a great time. I know I saw at least one photo on social media.
Yeah. Happy birthday, Mrs. Evans.
Happy birthday. All right, let's talk about Duke basketball though, because that's usually what we do here. So Duke did beat South Dakota on Saturday. I don't know, Donald, did you get a chance to listen to the first half of the show Jason and I recorded the other day?
I did. And I have some thoughts on Indiana quickly. I know Jason talked a lot about it, but I had a couple of extra thoughts I wanted to add.
Okay, why don't you just go ahead, and I will chime in anything I think that the two of you forgot. There shouldn't be much.
No, and I agree with a lot of what Jason said. I agree. First start off that Wendell Carter Jr. had a terrific game. I thought I was watching the game from home, which is a welcome change for sometimes, because you get to actually listen to the commentary, and he got a lot of love, and for good reason. He doesn't get talked a lot about because of all the attention given to Marvin Bagley. But if Marvin Bagley, I think Jay Bill said numerous times during that broadcast, if Marvin Bagley III had not reclassified, Wendell Carter would be the best big man in the country. And he really showed it against Indiana. He drew the hard assignments. He had that Davis guy, Deron Davis, who really went off, but Wendell Carter was giving it right back to him. And the one thing that I love about him, we talk a lot about the poise of the team, and they showed that again against Indiana. But I feel like of the guys, he's the most poised. Like I don't feel like, even when he has a bad call go against him, he doesn't really that much. He just kind of he doesn't spaz out or anything like that. He just kind of reacts quickly, and then he really defines the Coach K mantra of next play. Like that is Wendell Carter Jr. He literally he's able to tune that out and get to the next play, and really he rebounds. He bounces back a lot from sometimes when he has a bad game, and we'll get into South Dakota, but I think when he has an off game, he doesn't let that phase him. And I think that's one thing that I think should be talked about more when it comes to Wendell Carter Jr.
Yeah, I think that poise is really impressive. We've talked about it already a couple times in this short season. But Bagley and Carter in particular, and Carter often will draw tougher defensive assignments like he did against Indiana with Davis, because Davis is a much bigger body than either of those two guys. And Carter, I think had to handle him more often. And I don't think this will be the only big, experienced big man that Carter's going to have to go up against this year, who will probably put up numbers, but Carter, it seems like he's able to just kind of internalize, move on, and recognize that he's going to get beat like that sometimes. And he's still a good defender, and he doesn't have to totally shut down the other team's big man to make a really positive impact on defense. And it doesn't seem like Davis's success against him was really getting to him, other than the fact that Carter did foul out and only played 25 minutes.
Right. But the other thing is, I think he plays, so far what I've seen from him compared to Bagley is that he has more of a back to the basket type of game, but he has other, he can do a lot of other things as well. It's not the best way to define him, but I feel like he has more of those tools in his basket than Bagley does. Bagley is more of he's getting the ball in the post, and, Bagley likes to turn around and basically face the basket, and then he goes to work. Carter feels very comfortable getting the ball, backing down somebody, and then making a move, whether it's a fadeaway jumper or turning around and laying it in or dunking it. I think he has a lot more of those fundamentals, and it's kind of, we talked, I know you talked a couple weeks ago about Bagley's game versus like the new type of big man versus Jahlil Okafor and the old type of game. I think Wendell Carter makes that bridge very, very well at times, and I think he's very comfortable in both settings. But the other thing I want to talk about, and Jason talked about this as well very quickly, Marquise Bolden. He only had 1 point. He didn't have any rebounds, but he had a key block and he had 2 steals, including what I thought was the play of the game, was that late in the second half, where he tapped the ball loose, dove after it, grabbed the ball, and then trying to start a break, got fouled in the process. And that was the play that Grayson Allen was talking about after the game, when he said that this is the type of plays that we need at Duke. He even, if you watch the replay, he's yelling that at the bench. He's like, that's what we need. That's the type of play that Duke, that's how Duke does, essentially, is what he was saying. So that doesn't show up in the stat sheet, in my opinion. He also, when he came in to spell Wendell Carter, when Wendell Carter was in foul trouble, he, Davis, still made a couple of baskets, but a lot of times he did enough defense to make Davis force a kickback out to somebody else who took a bad shot. And I think that, those sort of things don't show up in the stat sheet. So I think he's looking better. At times he's had a stretch of a few games now where I think he's had great spells when Bagley or Carter are on the bench. And I just want that to be made aware that effort that he gave against Indiana was key, and it didn't go unnoticed by myself.
Yeah. And I like you said, I think we talked about it a fair bit in the first segment, but that energy from Bolden, it's not like, I think that Bolden would prefer to have a bigger role. Certainly he would probably like to be playing 20, 25 minutes a game. If this is all he can do, and if Bagley and Carter continue to just beat double machines, this is all Bolden has to do. And honestly, it might work out better for him to have this role. It seems like he's embraced it, which I don't know about you, I would have been skeptical of at the beginning of the season. There were the rumors in the spring that he was thinking of transferring. The fact that he's embraced a role of being basically the fourth big in the rotation, the second guy off the bench, and that he still comes in and gives energy minutes is really impressive, and not something I expected coming into the season. So I think I've changed my opinion about him a pretty fair amount since even 3 weeks ago. So yeah, that is really impressive.
Absolutely. And I think, to kind of cap off Indiana, both he's learned a lot from these freshmen. And I think it really shows. I think, we were talking about the fact that we didn't think of him as an energy player, and now he realizes to get on the court, that's what he needs to do. When Bagley and Carter get to the bench, he needs to bring the same intensity so that the other team doesn't think, oh, it's Bolden, we're okay now. We can climb back into this ball game, or we can put the game away. So I think he's doing that very well. But one thing he's also learning that I've seen it a couple times, not against Indiana, but in a couple other games, he goes up to try and grab rebounds with two hands. And when we were playing Indiana, they talked a lot about how Wendell Carter, no matter what he does, if he jumps up in the air to grab a ball, to grab a rebound, to try and tip dunk, whatever, he always goes up with two hands to try and grab the ball. This very old school way of going up for rebounds where, today you'll see people try and jump as high as possible with one hand and try to grab the rebound. And he's coming down with it over a lot of people, and he's jumping with two. That tells me that he has great athleticism, and it's a very teachable move. It's a very simple, nuanced detail that goes unnoticed by a lot, but I like that Carter does that, and I like that it's rubbing off on other people, especially Marquise Bolden, who, when he comes into the game, we need that energy and we need those rebounds, and he's been doing that in the last few games. I've been very impressed by him.
All right, let's talk really briefly about the South Dakota game. So since this podcast started, Duke beat the South Dakota Coyotes. Final score, oh my gosh, why did I lose it?
96-80.
Yeah, there we go. So they beat the Coyotes 96-80. I think the most notable thing to come out of this game is that Duke actually lost in the second half. The announcers kept talking about it because Duke came out to such a big lead in the first half that it seemed like in the second half, Coach K kind of called the dogs off, emptied the bench, really got playing time for guys down in the rotation. Jack White got a few minutes. Justin Robinson got in the game at the end. We saw a pretty fair amount of Jordan Goldwire. So I wouldn't look at the final score and say, oh, Duke only beat a team that had to travel 2,500 miles to be there by 16 points at home. I would look at it and say that, if you want to take the positive spin, Duke just roared out to a great start. This was probably the last game in the stretch where you could talk about them possibly having tired legs just from the schedule they've played recently. And the announcers kept referencing that in the second half, South Dakota was still pretty fired up to be in Cameron. So, Donald, did you get to see the South Dakota game? And if so, what were your impressions? And maybe talk more about the first half than the second half, since I think that the first half is really the only important part of the game that we should take away from, I would say.
Yeah, so I think the one thing that I took away, first of all, I thought for the most part, it was a pretty comfortable victory. It wasn't where we were having the, oh no, not again type of moments during this game. It was one of those where we, for once we actually pulled away a little bit early and kind of coasted to the finish, as opposed to having to, come from behind late and put out a flurry at the end. So I think Grayson Allen had another wonderful game. He had 8 of 11 shooting, 25 points. Marvin Bagley III. Why did I forget his name? Marvin Bagley III. Also,
he's only been the best player in college basketball this year.
Yeah, it's weird. You know what? It was autocorrect. I'm looking at my notes, and autocorrect does not like Bagley apparently. We'll figure that out. But anyway, he had another. Basically,
autocorrect better learn Bagley pretty soon.
Is going to have to. I've been typing it a lot lately. Yeah. As probably have you and Jason. But he had is kind of almost a ho-hum game for him. 19 points and 12 boards. Like I almost feel stupid saying that. Yeah, he kind of had a meh game with 19 points and 12 boards.
And he brought 3 shots too.
On 8 of 11. Yeah, same thing. So Delorier had a great game off the bench. He had 13 points, 9 boards. The one thing I think we didn't do well, and there's probably a lot in the second half when I'm thinking back on it, we didn't protect the ball very well. We had 19 turnovers, which is when you're coming off of the high of the Indiana game where we only had 8 turnovers. That's kind of a surprise to me.
I actually think that was a second half problem. In the first half, the Duke only turned it over like maybe 1 or 2 times going into the half, and the announcers were like, man, Duke is just controlling the ball and controlling the game. And in the second half, it was like every possession was going out of our hands.
Yeah, and I think a lot of them also is like, we had a lot of assists in the first half too. I think we had like 12 assists in the first half. so we're spreading the ball around. We're doing the natural things that we're used to doing this season. And I think a lot of it wasn't a lot where we were, careless with the ball. But it's, South Dakota played pretty well. They were just outmatched. I think, Wendell Carter didn't have a great game, statistically, but he helped us dominate inside. We had 54 points in the paint. We had 20 second chance points. That's going to, obviously help you win ball games, especially against a team that's kind of outmatched like South Dakota was.
Yeah. And the one thing that I'll add is that South Dakota's leading scorer this year is Matt Mooney. I know that we didn't preview this game in depth. Matt Mooney played in this game, shot 1 for 5, and I believe only had 3 points. So, and he's their lead guard. So a good job by the defensive squad, particularly in the perimeter, for shutting down their best player. I thought that was impressive. And even though we didn't talk much about it, the announcers kind of got into the fact that South Dakota feels like they can compete this year in their league, and that this was a year for them to go out and play good teams on the road, because they thought, maybe they'll get a good shot at one of these top programs. And to their credit, they battled all the way to the end of the game, and they kept it, I wouldn't say close, but at least competitive. There was a point in the second half where I think they drew within like 12 or 13, and the crowd kind of had to wake up and be like, "Oh, we're still in the game. We still have to, ride out the end of it and not just totally fall asleep." So that was impressive by South Dakota. I enjoyed watching them, and I know that their coach had a lot of nice things to say about Coach K and Bagley and the rest of the program after the game.
Yeah, they were mentioning the coach, and to wrap up real quickly, the coach. I guess he is his fourth year. This is his fourth season at South Dakota. And literally since he got to South Dakota, he said, "I want my players to play against Duke in Cameron." And he's been trying to get this game for, almost, 3 seasons, and finally got it in his fourth season. So I think that's pretty cool when a team and a coaching staff wants so bad to get that experience, because they know how much it'll help their players win or lose. So I think that's pretty cool. And you could tell, like, not just the players, but the South Dakota fans that were there were very loud and very, like, into the game the entire time and taking in the experience. And honestly, in a game that was, pretty comfortable, a victory for Duke, that's, it's cool to see that in a way.
Definitely. So one more game topic, sort of standard topic, before we do our normal wrap up. Duke has a game tomorrow night. So tonight is Monday. Duke has a game tomorrow night against the St. Francis from Pennsylvania. Did you, Donald? I think you got an opportunity a little bit to look into St. Francis. Is there anything that the Duke fans should be looking for in this game Tuesday night?
Yeah, so the real thing that I want to highlight on is the fact that I just want to talk about the people, the guys that they have that are going to really log the heavy minutes and are going to be the ones that they rely on to score the most points. They're led by Keith Braxton, who's their 6'4" sophomore guard. He averages 16.4 points per game. He averages 7.9 rebounds a game, 2.6 assists a game, and is their best 3-point shooter and one of their best field goal shooters. So he's going to be their main guy. But other guys who average over 10 points per game, Isaiah Blackman, their 6'1" junior guard, Jamal King, their 5'10" junior guard, and Andre Wolfert, who is their 6'2" junior guard. They're going to log considerable minutes. The two guys that you need to key in on inside are Devias Kuzavas, and I know I've misspelled that or mispronounced that, and I apologize. Kuzavas and Mark Flagg are the real only big men that log real minutes. Kuzavas is 6'10", Flagg is 6'8", but after that, this is a really, really small team that's very dominated by their guards. As a result, they don't grab many rebounds. The simple key to this game are inside presence. Obviously, Bagley, Carter, Delorier, and Bolden should have a field day against this defense because they're going to be, 3-4 inches taller than just about everybody on their team at the very least. So those guys are going to really be big. Can they, this is really the last game. We have one more on Saturday against Boston College, but after that they get like 3 games in 20 days instead of 12 games in basically 28 days. But on the perimeter, our guards are also bigger than most of the red flash that see considerable minutes. So if we can force some turnovers and run on the transition, combined with controlling the interior, grabbing a lot of rebounds, this should be a comfortable victory.
Yeah, and then as you mentioned, Duke plays Boston College on Saturday. The Eagles, I still don't think are playing at a quite competitive ACC level. They haven't been all that competitive the last few years. They've lost 3 games so far this season, and the game I believe is up in Chestnut Hill. So hopefully some Duke fans up in the Boston area are going to get to go see the Blue Devils on Saturday. The one thing looking at Boston College is that they do spread the ball around. They've got 4 guys who average double figures, and then a 5th who's averaging 9 points a game. So it's not kind of one guy for BC. It's kind of the whole team, but they have a few losses this year. They lost at Nebraska in the ACC Big Ten Challenge. Before that, they lost on the road to Providence, who's a pretty good team, but they did get kind of beaten by them pretty bad. So Duke hopefully shouldn't have much of a problem this week with either St. Francis or with BC, even though BC is going to be the first conference road game. Probably a good opportunity for the Blue Devils to stretch their legs a little bit more in road ACC play before they start playing at places like Chapel Hill, or South Bend or wherever else they're going this season. So,
and this is the first time we've had that December ACC game in a number of years. And I'm not. They are starting to go back to this a little bit, having the one before the new year. But this is going to be a nice test as far as intensity level. The last game before finals, can they match the intensity level of Boston College playing on the road? And I think it's going to be, if it's anything like it was a couple years ago, it's going to be a lot of Duke fans in the stands, but it's still a true road game, and the guys will need to come out with the fire and passion that they've done so far. If they do that, I think we're in the clear.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up with our usual closing segments. So we don't have Jason here to do his player of the week and parting shot, but Donald, I can ask you, give me your player of the week, and you can include the Indiana game and the South Dakota game as you see fit.
My player of the week for those 2 games is Grayson Allen. He had 21 points against Indiana, 25 against South Dakota. Really hit outside shots when we needed them, especially against Indiana, and came up with some very big plays. So for that, he is my player of the week, and really, really good to see him back shooting the ball well again.
And I'm going to take the same guy. An excellent week for Allen. I think we're going to be giving these awards pretty much back and forth this season to him and Bagley, but don't sleep on, I guess, any of the rest of the starters, because it was a pretty great team effort in Bloomington the other night in the ACC Big Ten Challenge. So and although Jason, I don't think, was correct about how Duke pulled away late against South Dakota, as he sort of jokingly predicted, the trend continued. And I think, as I said before, not necessarily that I prefer Duke to win this way, but the fact that they can is pretty promising for such a young team that has so little college basketball experience. And then, Donald, do you have a parting
shot? Yes, I do. I'm going to talk about Duke football. We're going bowling, guys, and we're going to my hometown, Detroit.
Have we not talked about?
We didn't talk about it. You want to talk about it now? We don't have to make that my party shot.
You know what? I'm totally sorry. Go ahead. Give me your piece on Duke football playing in the bowl game.
Well, as you guys know, the bowl selections came out on Sunday, and they were rewarded with a trip to Detroit and a berth in the Quick Lane Bowl, which is on December 26th. Detroit is my hometown, and they will get to see the Blue Devils for the first time. And I'm very excited that our team will get that extra 3 weeks of practice and the opportunity to hopefully win one more game this year. I'm trying to figure out a way to get up there for the game. It's going to require some schedule shifting because my family does not live there anymore, but I'm hoping to make it work. The team we're facing, Northern Illinois, who is a pretty good team. We're not going to preview them tonight or anything like that, but they're a really good team. According to the Massey Composite rankings, which is kind of a ranking that combines all of the various computer rankings for college football. Northern Illinois is 59th, and Duke is listed at 54th. So they're pretty on par with us as far as ability. They barely lost to Boston College during the season, but they did beat Nebraska in Lincoln, which is no easy feat. So this will be a good test for Duke Gang as they seek their 7th win in the season and their 2nd bowl win in 3 years.
All right, that's I had totally forgotten that we got our bowl selection from the last time we recorded until today. So that's pretty exciting. I won't be able to make it to the game this year, unfortunately. So you're gonna have to try your best to be there to represent the show for all of us. And I don't have much more to say. I think, as you said, maybe we'll preview that game as it gets closer and we get to do maybe a little bit more research about Northern Illinois because, it is a bowl game. Duke has the opportunity to come out from this season with a winning record. So that would be pretty. I will wrap with 2 quick notes. The first on college football. The ACC lost, I think, one of its best coaches this week. When Jimbo Fisher took his new contract over at Texas A&M, they gave him $75 million to coach their program for the next 10 years. And man, being a college football coach is great work if you're good at it. Because
we should do that one day. That is
a lot of money. Good for him. I guess he's really lucky that they don't have to pay the players, but that's a discussion for another time. The other thing is a reminder that as we're getting into this part of the season where there isn't as much basketball to discuss, I think, like you said, the next few weeks, there aren't that many games. We will do a show where we play the game we suggested the other week where I watch old basketball clips. So if you have favorite basketball clips from, say, before 2000, send them to us. We got a couple submissions already. I know there's a video of Shaquille O'Neal at LSU that I'm going to watch, right? That was one we got submitted.
That is one, yep.
So you can post those over in any of the threads we do at the forum where we discuss the show. You can also send them to us. Email address, it's dbrpodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget also, if you love the show, you should subscribe on iTunes or Google or Stitcher or SoundCloud, anywhere that you get your podcasts. Leave us a review. It helps us get found. If you have any complaints, feel free to email them to that same email address, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. All 3 of us will read anything that comes into that address. Any comments that you want to send there or that you want to leave on the forum. Don't forget, we always post a thread about any particular episode on the forum. You can find the forum at forums.dukebasketballreport.com. And finally, if you want to sponsor a show, you can email us also at that same address, dbrpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll get that all set up for you. So,
Sam, one last thing. If you guys are listening to this it'll be Tuesday, December 5th when this is released to the masses. But Wednesday, December 6th, marks exactly 3 years since the first episode of the DBR podcast. Can you believe that? 3 years.
Happy anniversary or whatever.
Man.
Pretty cool. Listeners, feel free to not go back and listen to our original episodes because I don't know that they're all that good.
There are a lot of ums and uhs for sure.
Yeah,
we've toned that down a little bit.
We've tried to tone that down. I also think that we've probably become more familiar with each other and sort of know each other's ticks a little better than we did before. I know that when we started, like I had never met either you or Jason in person. We had communicated like over the forums before because we're all moderators and have been posting on there for a while. But I didn't know any of you actually in person when we started the show. So there was a lot of kind of getting used to it. So feel free not to listen to those old episodes. We leave them up there for your entertainment or whatever. But I
actually listened to episode 1 the other day, and it sounds like the first day of camp. We're like, "Hi, I am Donald. I come from Washington D.C. I like Duke basketball," and you're like, "I like Duke basketball too." Like
I was thinking recently that we might want to, like, because we've been doing this for so long, we might want to like reintroduce ourselves. But I feel like we get enough of the biographical data interspersed within the show that hopefully folks know enough about us to at least know where we're coming from. I'm the young one, and Donald's the middle-aged one, and Jason's the old one, right? So that's about all you need to know. So anyway, that'll do it. So for Donald Wine, who is here with me now, for Jason Evans, who is not on the call but was earlier, I am Sam Klein. This has been episode 96 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. Duke Band, take us home.